Yeah, hello. Good morning, class. I think it's good afternoon, and it's been a 10-minute delay. I hope I am audible now. Yeah. So let us dive into the lecture today. So we'll be learning about executive and legislative. What are various executive and legislatives all around the world, or like at least what are the functions, and what do we mean by legislative and executive? So before diving into what is legislative and executive, you have to understand. The theory of separation of powers. Like you have to initially understand where did this concept of legislative, executive, and judiciary have come into picture. Now, this separation of powers. So, if we consider it's a tripartite model. Yes, so it gives tripartite model of governance. So originally, like what is this tripartite govern model of governance? It basically has legislative body and executive body, and the overlooking body to look into whether the laws have been in line with the constitution of the particular state or the primitive society that has been existing. So this origin has been linked to ancient Rome and ancient Greece. So if you have gone through the Western political theory or Western political thought in your first semester, you might have come across the Aristotle's theory of separation of powers, which was later developed, or which initial the theory was seen in Aristotle's concepts, and later it was taken hold by the Locke, and later it was given a fuller picture by Montesquieu. So you all know Montesquieu, who, if there's a question comes or an MCQ comes like theory of separation of powers, it's by who? Then the option is Montesquieu. So this can be seen in the writings of Aristotle, Locke, and as we have already read, it's legislative, executive, and judiciary. These are three separate organs. So these separate organs are either separated by the tight waterline compartments, or they have been been put together and they have been coordinating together. Okay, so suppose legislative makes an any legislature or any act, then executive will look into whether this has been uh, viable according to the policy, and supposedly even executive has passed or executed or trying to execute that legislature made by the legislative. Then comes the judiciary. So judiciary can also keep checks and balances. So as you must have come across the word judicial review, right? So judicial review is nothing but judiciary looking into the acts of the government or the policies, whether they are in line with the provisions provided under the constitution. Now, theory of separation of powers. So how does this compartment works? Either all the powers are together, or only some powers are being combined. Like executive will have a look over on the legislature, or none of the powers. Like it's like watertight. Watertight compartments ante they're packed. I cannot move from my position of power, like being an executive, to look into the legislative power. Okay, that overarching power or that overview power is not allowed. That those are called watertight compartments, and these watertight compartments can be seen in which nation? Okay, I'll tell you. So this can be seen in USA, but the closer working or closer mutual cooperation can be seen in India. So in India, we do not follow strict separation of powers, because there is a concept of judicial review and the ninth schedule, and the rest of all the drama you can unveil in Indian political chapter or the emergency chapter. So now what is if you look into the picture, so what is picture separation of powers? So what is separation of powers? So this parliament is nothing but legislature. Legislature ante enti? The representatives which represent the legislature is the parliament. Like parliament is like a building with where the powers are dissolved inside. So if we consider it, the parliament is a legislature, and legislature power to make and change any law. And it is overlooked by executive government, which has power to put this law made by the legislative into action. See, making is one thing, and executing is another thing. Just like you make a plan to study for your exams. but doesn't mean that you are executing it. So the execution comes into picture. You will find the result only when you will execute it, right? So if you divide yourself into two or three or more uh, personalities. So one personality would legislate or would sit down and make a plan. Then the other one would sit down to study and executes that plan. And what is judiciary? Judiciary comes into picture after the result. So after the result, it's for you to analyze, right? So whether you have qualified that exam or not qualified that exam. So if you have qualified that exam, definitely you have done something right. If you haven't qualified that exam, you have done something wrong. So same thing, if a legislative and executive passes a bill, it is the duty of judiciary to look into whether these bills are under the provisions of the constitution or not. So this is how the separation of powers works in, and you can as this is a theory exam, you can write those diagram and keep a circle of judiciary, parliament, and executive and make a picture of it. Need not write exactly the building and all, just the triangle picture, the flow chart. So benefits. So now what are the benefits of this separation of powers? So we are basically getting into the executive and legislative. This is not theory of separation of powers chapter. That just wanted to introduce you so that you'll have a free understanding or better understanding of what is legislative and executive. So on the democratic liberalization, so what are the benefits? It prevents power. See, it prevents power from vesting in one body. Example, in your classroom, if there is a seer, there is an junior or there's an extra secondary seer also, class representative. So why do we need to have two seers? So that the one seer would not hold the power over the students and be a link between the professor and students. So for the same purpose, if there is theory of separation of powers, then this prevents the holding of power from only one organization or from only one organ and it becoming the aristocrat. Then democratic liberalization. Why? What is democratic liberalization? As they are separated, there is no overarching power from the above. These organs are free to make their own policies. So this free, there is a boundary for everything. So this free to make policies, if they are in the limits of the constitutions, if they are limits of the powers that have been put over through them, through the document, then it is well and then good. But if they are using it for the overarching powers, then anything is in the out of the limit is bad, as you all know. So it is better for democratic liberalization. Now, theory of separation of powers. So, of course, there has to be defects because in contemporary world, ours is a contemporary world, this theory of separation of powers was useful when it was ancient Greece, when it was a primitive society or like newly developing nation state system. There it was well and then good, but as it is an interlinked world, as we call it global village in international perspective. So this theory of separation of powers is not commendable, is not that workable. It's not uh, beneficiary because it separates the institutions or the organs, all already there are many institutions and the departments, they work in close relationship. So with further separation of powers, these institutions might be restricted of their power. So there should be no watertight compartments so that the policy flows smoothly. So why should a policy flow smoothly could be learned in the policy analysis or any other chapter that comes by. And USA examples are must if you are reading anything in comparative politics. So it's USA which follows a strict separation of powers, and India, the organs like a legislative, executive, and judiciary are interdependent. You might have understood the structure by now, looking into the question papers or the newspapers or parliamentary debates. Why, as such, we have the parliamentary system, how the policies are formed, why there's an agitation for any policies that's been made. So the India organs are interdependent and cannot follow a strict watertight compartments. Now here are the checks and balances. So the checks and balances could be followed by suppose a legislature, it can impeach the chief justice, whereas judiciary, it can, I'm reading the picture here, you can look at the picture. So it can declare the legislations anything that unconditional. Now what is the this flow between the executive and judiciary? Suppose legislator can say executive is responsible to the legislature and no confidence motions has to be followed. So but legislature can dis- disqualify members. So disqualification of members can be done on certain conditions. We'll not get into those conditions. So it has that power to disqualify the members. Now, what are these relationship between the executive and judiciary? Executive, uh, executive head. So we'll read what comes under executive. President appoints judges of Supreme Court, High Court. You'll read in the other things. But whereas judiciary can also declare executive act as unconstitutional if they have said to have crossed any line or any constitutional provisions. So this diagram, although it's very small, but you can make a much more better sense of it by looking or analyzing the picture. You can get the screenshot of the picture and analyze it after the class, and you can write the answer for yourself. Now, separation of powers in India. Separation of powers could be like internal separation of powers and external separation of powers. This internal could be within the legislature itself, within the executive itself, within the judiciary itself. Because you all know there's an hierarchical structure. There is no political institution or there is no institution which is not uh, hierarchical in nature. Hierarchical means there's a boss of boss of boss. Okay, it's a pyramidal structure. You should have known what's the hierarchical structure. And external is executive and legislature. Like it's not internal now. We have come into the external. Then between executive and judiciary, between judiciary and legislative. So you can look into the picture, both the diagrams and analyze. Okay, this is how the separation could be made or how the powers are divided as such. Now let us understand the executive. So for you to understand what is executive, let us look at the flow chart that is right above my head. So this is called executive. So executive is basically divided into two types. First one is nominal executive and second one is real executive. Nominal executive could be hereditary and elective, and real executives could be singular and plural. And now this is further divided into political and non-political. Political means democratic, totalitarian, and colonial. And this democratic is further divided into parliamentary, presidential, quasi-presidential. And this non-political is permanent in nature, and political is non-permanent in nature. So we'll keep this picture in mind, and also I've inserted it in the following sections, so which will be easy for you to understand. Now let us understand what is executive. So executive means which executes. It's in the name itself. So if you are very good with vocabulary, you can understand which executes means an implementing organ. So executive is an implementing organ. So it will formulate the policies which have been it will look into the policies which have been formulated by the legislative and execute such policies. So that is why it is called as executive organ, and its head and its principal members run the machinery and formulate national policy. So that is the duty and the functions of the executive. So executives are divided into nominal uh, and real. So this nominal could be hereditary is nothing but monarch or hereditary, and the elected president. So elected example India, and hereditary or nominal example, easy example is UK. So you can drop your answers in the chat box if I'm asking a question in between. So that's how the conversation should run. So the nominal either a monarch or an elected representative, and the basically nominal, it's in the name itself. He's not the real executive. So the nominal means they will not enjoy the real power. They can be simply called as a constitutional head. They are there for the purpose because the constitutional says so, and they are, you can say there's a saying, there's a word, uh, Indian president is a rubber stamp because he's a nominal executive, because the real executive is the prime minister. So he does not enjoy any real power, and he's just a constitutional head. But but what happens? The entire administration runs through him. Then you can question how, although you're saying he's a nominal executive and he does not have much real powers, but how can an entire administration runs through this nominal, so-called nominal head? Because The laws are made by the legislative, and once they are passed, they have to become an act. So the bills passed, in order them to become an act, the nominal executive or the nominal head, the president, has to assent to that bill. So then only it becomes an act. So it happens for every bill, like every parliamentary acts or every parliamentary or executive orders, or suppose even an executive order shall be passed, then president can pass an executive order when the assembly is not in session. So these are called ordinances. You will read them about ordinances in the later years. So, so this he does not basically enjoy the real power, and it's a constitutional head, but the entire administration. This is how the entire administration is run through him. And now the second one is. Uh, and the further divisions. So further divided into hereditary or monarchy. Hereditary means what? Hereditary ante వంశపారంపర్యంగా వస్తుంది. So this hereditary or the monarchical structure, these are basically they are indirectly elected, or they've been run through, or their family has been going on. Example, monarch, British monarch. There are no indirect elections. Their family has been passed down through generations. So that is called Vamshaparyanga hereditary. Then indirect elections could be seen in Malaysia. And this hereditary can be seen in UK, Saudi, Japan, and the real power is with the Council of Ministers. So Saudi, you can cancel it off. So the real power West with the Council of Ministers, although they are just nominal head. But whereas Saudi Arabia, the although it's a hereditary monarchy, the real power still vest with them. So they have the absolute power, unlike the UK monarch, where the UK monarch or the United Kingdom, British monarch, we can call it, yeah, British monarch, the real power is with the Council of Ministers. They are elected representatives, but the UK monarch is not an elected representative. It's an hereditary. But the contrary, the Saudi Arabia monarchs, although they are hereditary and they are not elected, they have absolute power. So I hope this picture is clear for you. You have to understand and draw those pictures in exam. Then absolute monarch heads Saudi Arabia, and they have real and absolute powers. And the same thing under hereditary or the monarchical structure through indirect elections could be seen in Malaysia. So now the second concept of real executive. So who is real executive? Real executive could be singular or plural. How? So what is singular? Single leader doesn't share power with the others. Okay, how example, President of United States of America, single most leader and the highest authority in the office of Congress. So the president does not share any power with the other members. So he single-handedly holds or keeps the legislative in check. Now, Constitution West, like how did he get this power? Not just because he won the elections or with a bumper majority, or not just that his party has won, but what happens is the Constitution has vested him with such powers. So, the singular leader example could be seen in the concept of presidential system or the president of United States of America. Then the plural powers are vested in a group of ministers. Okay, now the powers is devolved. So this devolution of power could be seen, and there are multiple members who hold. One such example is Switzerland. Switzerland, the authority of government is vested in group of members, group of presidents. So this is basically a confederation of presidents. There is no unique single president as such in USA, but Switzerland has a group of presidents where everybody will sit down. So everybody has got equal powers to pass any law or to make any executive acts. And also you might come up with this question like, does everybody need to sign on a paper in order or give their assent in order for them or in order for the bill to become an act? No, this group of residents will elect one president uh, who kind of acts as a ceremonial head, and his assent can be considered for following a certain bill, but the usage can be seen from the group of the presidents. Now, the other concept is political executive. So here, if we go back, so we can see in the picture. I'm looking at the picture. Please look at the picture. So there's a political non-permanent and non-political permanent. So if we consider political executive, so political executive is non-permanent in nature. Why? Because because it's elected by the people, and periodical elections happens, and these are not someone who work for the government, because the government is formed once they get into power. So they themselves form the government, and the group. This is a group which decides on the policies, makes policies, executes policies. So this group are elected by the people, and they make policies on behalf of the people. So that is why it is political in nature. And here people interests or their personal agendas or their party agendas could come into picture. So that is why it is political in nature. They cannot say that we are not aligned to any political party. Even being an independent, that's a party in itself, right? They have their own policies, they have their own manifestos for winning that elections, so and so. So this group makes decisions on behalf of the people and implement policies. They are not the permanent executive. Permanent executive will read in the next slide. So they are responsible for the setting the national values such as liberty, equality, and fraternity, because they said to have represented the people of that nation. So the people who elect them directly, for those representatives to represent the people as in whole, because all the people population of India cannot represent themselves in the parliament, right? So there has to be some acting head, some constituency member should represent their issues, so that those members are the representatives, basically MP, MLAs. Now we'll read about the what is permanent executive. So now, what is permanent executive? Who are these civil servants? Who are these bureaucrats? Who are these government employees, or the executive employees? Like, why are you writing, if suppose you are supposed to write UPSC exam, CSC, or any other CSC exam, what do you want to be doing once you get into, or once you qualify those exams? You will be the permanent executive. So what you will be doing? So what basically your powers are is, you will be executing those policies. You will be working along with these political executives and make policies, and you work for the ministry, not for the person. You work for the department. So that's how your powers are devolved, and you basically cannot take any policy decisions. You should be implementing the policies that has been made or executed by the political executive. So, and these bureaucrats serve as a link between the departments and the political executive. They are connecting link. So these bureaucrats are the connecting link, and they do not take any major decisions in the department, but their only work is to assist the public administrations in making all kinds of decisions. So they work for the department, and they make the policies execute in a proper way. So that's how the political executive function. Now, the next one, if we go back to the picture. So under we have the democracy, then this parliament and presidential. So now we'll again read what is parliamentary executive. Yes, parliamentary executive. Does India have parliamentary executive or presidential executive? Please drop your comments in the chat box. So does India, yes. So but the parliamentary executive is responsible to the legislature, and legislature can remove executive from the office, and cabinet ministers are headed by the prime ministers and is responsible to the legislature. If you are a first time reader of political science, or come across this concept of comparative politics, then this might seem little bit over the head. So if we tone down, this can be considered as a parliamentary executive. We are talking about executive and legislative in a parliamentary structure. So this is a parliamentary structure. What does parliamentary structure have? It has prime minister, it has council of ministers, and it has president. And president is a nominal executive, and prime minister is a real executive. So now the picture is clear, right? Now we are talking about, let's come down to India. So India, what happens? We have parliamentary executive because India is a parliamentary system. And legislature can remove the executive from the office. Yes. and cabinet ministers are headed by the prime minister, is responsible to the legislature. So they basically run the legislature, and they are the body that looks into the policies, funds, or they are the private purse. They are the purse. They maintain the finances, look into the issues, international policies, treaties, budget, all such things. Then presidential executive. So here the presidential executive, they follow strict separation of powers as we have read in the first slide itself. So here executive is not responsible to the legislature. So okay, cool. Then executive is a head of both the government and the state. Here the government and the state in the parliamentary system are both different heads. So the power has been devolved. Here the power has been not been separated. So it's a sorry, here the power has been separated, there the powers has not been separated, they have close working together. So in presidential executive powers theory of strict separation of powers, so executive is head of the both state and the government and not elected or responsible to the legislature. And the parliamentary examples is India, UK, Germany, and Italy, and the presidential examples could be USA. Now let us understand the composition, like what consists of this executive. So this should be the first question that should come into your mind when we are reading anything as such executive, judiciary, or let's say suppose president or prime minister, anything we are talking about. We are not done with the lecture yet. If you are asking for important questions, kindly follow the lecture, you will understand. So executive consists of political executives such as prime minister, cabinet, and Council of Minister. These are examples of political executives. These examples can be added in the previous slide. And the political executive is directly elected as in USA and indirectly elected as in India. Because we just elect the representatives, and who becomes prime minister, who becomes cabinet minister, who becomes council of minister is not in our hands. It's all indirectly elected. And the permanent executive consists of bureaucrats, which is a permanent position, and political executive further divided into three categories: democratic, titular, and colonial. So this diagram, if we consider, you can go back to the previous slides where I've inserted a picture. So that picture comes into picture. So that image comes into picture now. So the political executive further divided into three categories. Now let us understand what is this democratically elected political executive. Who are this elected political executive? They are chosen by the members because it's in the name itself. Democracy is by the people. Then remain accountable to the constituents. So do our political representatives are accountable to our constituency members? Yes or no? Yes. They are responsible because they are the persons who we elected to represent our issues of the constituency in the policy purview. So, and this can be seen in British cabinet, USA, and India. So this is a democratic political executive. Next one is totalitarian system. So the totalitarian system, people do not have power to remove the real executive. As we can see this in the notion of Saudi, the people cannot remove the real head or the monarchical head, right? So they have no freedom. So what happens when they have no power to remove the executives or no power to elect the executive, where the people will lose their freedom of speech or expression, uh, or 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 say their view on any policies that has been made by the government. So here the people will lose their liberty. So they cannot question the government. They has to follow only when the government makes anything. So this is what the difference between the democracy and totalitarianism. And they enjoy absolute powers. Example, Iraq and Nigeria. And now the another interesting one is colonial executive. What are colonial executives? The countries or the bodies which act under the authority of colonial government still. Commonwealth nations. Commonwealth nations, they are still under the colonial power, although they have the elected representatives, they still see the queen, sorry, now the king, as their constitutional head. So this is another one. Then let us understand what is quasi-presidential or quasi-parliamentary. So this is also very important. This is an important MCQ question. So quasi-presidential, they'll ask what country has it. Then example could be France. So the quasi-presidential is president is real executive. So all the president is real executive. Although they have prime minister and council of ministers who are directly elected by the people, but still the prime minister and the council of ministers are responsible to the president. They are under the control of the president. So I hope you are getting this divisions. This is too much to take in, but if you read one more time, so this will be perfect. You'll become a perfect uh, undergrad student. Now let us understand the composition and functions. Now the French model is a quasi-presidential model, as I've said earlier. Now let us understand the appointments. Now what? What are the functions of the executive? So there are real functions of the executive. First one is appointments. The second one is enforcement of laws. Third one is making treaties. Fourth one is defense, war and peace. And fifth one is conduct of foreign affairs. Sixth one is policy making. So these are all, and increasing role of executives. So these are all functions of executive. So now let us understand what are these functions in brief. So the appointments, chief executive makes all the significant appointments. Yes, how? President appoints all the appointments, all the executive appointments. Example, President appoints Chief Justice of India, governors, AG, Advocate General, then High Court judges, then ambassadors representing India outside, then UPSC members, then president also appoints the finance commission heads. So all such executive actions which are necessary for a country to run properly are appointed by the president. So that's how the chief executive makes all the appointments. Now next one is enforcement of laws. So it is a principal responsibility. So this has to be the very first and foremost responsibility of the executive, because its main agenda is to enforce the laws of the legislatives made by the legislature. So its main duty is to execute such laws or policies and look into whether the policies have been reaching, or the agenda of the policies have been met or not. So and also the another important function is when law is broken, it is the duty of executive to look into and punish those arbitrators or perpetrators. Okay. So when the law is broken, executive must prosecute the perpetrators, and this is the another most important function of the executive. The next one is treaties. So executive negotiates treaties with the conformity of international law and provisions of the state constitution. So executive has the authority to make treaties and in in line with the international law and also the provisions that have been mentioned in the state constitution. So here state doesn't mean that state's constitution, nation, India as a whole, the state, the nation state system. So the defense of war and peace. So another most important function of executive is state has to maintain and preserve country's peace. So it will safeguard its functions and look into if there has been any warlike situations. So it is a duty of executive to look into any warlike situations and take necessary measures to control it. And organizing the military for the state's defense and preparing for war and fighting a war. So again, another most important function. Next one is foreign affairs and foreign policy making. Executive plays a crucial role. So why does India is friends with some of the nations during some period, and it's not friends with some of the nations during the other periods, because the executive which comes into the picture, or we can say the political party that comes into the picture, or that forms the government, has their own alliances or their own perspective. So the policies are made as such. And now we can understand executive is basically prime minister, president, and the council of prime minister and council of ministers and etc. So these are who? These are the political heads, right? These are the political members. Uh, they form the political executive. So their views and their party views would come into picture while making a policy. So that is why we have not drastically changing foreign policy, just it has evolved over the periods and managing the relations. And the policy making is second most important or the crucial function of the executive. So this ensures socio-economic and cultural growth of its citizen, and it controls now the purse of the nations. So this is also a line you must remember. This is also you can write in your answer. So to control the purse of the nations, and it decides on the policies and the taxation and how a citizen should be taxed, how much the nation shall spend on certain categories. So bureaucracy is involved at every stage. Then the political system fate depends on the role of executive. So this must be kept under proper checks and balances. So as executive, if given overarching power, so it becomes it gets enormous amount of power, and it becomes basically the democracy. It becomes a tyranny in inside of the democratic institutions. So that is why there has to be a political system to keep tab on the overarching powers of the executive. Now, increasing role of executive, why? Because this can be seen because of dual political system, or this can be seen in the concept of welfare governments or the direct elections, and also the political parties. Political parties have come into the picture and influence the executive, legislative, and judiciary. Sorry, can't say judiciary, legislative and executive. So their compartments and how their influence and attitude have helped people to overcome such issues, or to influence the executive organ of the government. So now next one would be legislature. So legislature, I think I have to hurry up. So it is also known as parliament. Remember, parliament means legislature, okay? And means parliament means talk. These are basic things. French word parles, or also it is also known as embodiment of general will of the people, mirror of the nation, congress of opinions. Why? Why does this have such name? Because these are directly elected by the people. These are people's representatives who are representing the constituency. Then they are representing that whole constituency inside of the parliament. So that is why it is called embodiment of general will of the people, and also mirror of the nation, because it's a reflection of people's ideas and thoughts and views that will be represented in the house. And also congress of opinions. Congress is basically congress and a group. So congress means a group of opinions which are put together and shall be made as a policies. Now representation of people. So representation of people, democracy, people elect their own representative. So and also how it is done. You might get this question, how it is done. So that is why political culture as in a unit is very important. So if it is not done yet, you can wait for the political culture lecture to get over, or otherwise if it's already done, you can go revise it. Why political culture uh, influences the nation as such. I mean, if some question that comes to your mind, like why is India as such? Why is it as such that we have national parties, regional parties, and state level parties, and why is there a combination of coalition governments, and why does the voter percentage or the representation keeps changing with every cycle? It's because of, and also uh, why the agenda or the manifesto of the political parties are as such. So these all can be dependent on the political culture of that nation. And these influences could be both everything, cultural, historical, then social background, everything. So through process of attitudes, preferences, viewpoints, decides, this represents the political people's opinion through elections. And what is the organization of legislature? This can be done into two houses, unicameral house or the bicameral house. Unicameral is a name itself, single. Bicameral means two houses. So bicameral legislature is means two chambers or two houses. So basically the parliament or the or the legislature will have two houses. So for one is upper house or the popular house. Sorry, one is lower house or the popular house, and the next one is upper house or the older house. So this will have what? So example, India has bicameral system. Even USA has bicameral system. UK, France, Russia, then Swiss, then Australia. All these countries have bicameral system, means they have two. They have both popular chamber and upper chamber. Then by here you can see by means two cameral, two houses. And in India, in India, even the states have the unicameral or the bicameral houses. Like we have a member of legislative assembly and member of legislative council. So there are two houses. So 22 states of India have adopted this bicameral legislature. This is also a very important question. That is why you might get confused if we are reading Indian political structure or the Indian political institutions or the state structure. Like, why do states have both MLA and why do some states have both legislative assembly and legislative council? Why does not the other one have only legislative assembly? So this is because of the divisions, and it's at the states, it's for the states to make ratification. So only 22 states have made so far. And the first house is usually called the lower house, and second house is the upper house. And this lower house is a popular one because these are directly elected by the people and they enhance the policy making. Okay, and the Britain, the members of the upper house or the second house are called Lord House of Lords or the Rajya Sabha. These are all nominated members. So these are done through indirect elections. And in India, upper house is Rajya Sabha, indirectly elected. And party politics and process of law making is much more complex in this bicameral legislature, because one house is the popular house who are elected by the members, sorry, who are elected by the people, and second house or the upper chamber, which are indirectly elected. So there could be a clash between both of them in aligning their opinions or the viewpoints with the policies. Example, in India, Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, they have their own uh, complex issues in ratifying or making any bill. So, but also, this is very important. This bicameral house keeps the balance between the center union and the federal structures that has been made. So this bicameral house, there are positives and negatives to any structure that we talk about. So the positive thing, as this is a democracy, and in democracy there no institution shall have the overarching powers, which makes them the too much powerful. Too much power is also sometimes negative in a democratic institutions. So this bicameral house, although they have the complex situations, so but they still maintain the issues. And unicameral are legislative with single houses. Example, China, New Zealand, Zimbabwe, Turkey, Portugal, Denmark, and Finland. And one chamber based on popular representation is responsible for entire functioning. And in India, yeah, the single unicameral houses are Haryana, Punjab, Orissa, and Kerala. And functions, their main function is legislative and lawmaking body, and deliberative functions to deliberate upon the matters that are which are ministerial importance. Yeah, so they'll discuss. You have to go through parliamentary sessions or the Lok Sabha sessions every time they go live. So that is how should be the core uh, character or the personality of the pol science graduate. So why once you are graduating in your third year, you should be able to understand all the policies that have been put to debate in your entire 3 year course. So it reflects the public opinions because they are elected by the public, and they have, please go through the lectures also, sorry, debates, because they just don't argue. They put up interesting and informative values, so which can be useful for your further research. And legislative of the state is also custodian of the national purse, because budget is passed, budget is made, and it put to vote. It will be discussed, and appreciation and voting, vote of thanks, everything shall be considered under the legislative head. And imposition of any tax. So recent budget sessions, legislative has the authority to impose any tax and to control any expenditure that comes upon the uh, states, I mean, nation's expenditure. And decline because a strong cabinet, there's been a decline in power of legislative, strong cabinet under leadership of prime minister, then diminished the role of legislative of parliament. Then cabinet emerged as a main form because they have formed as a syndicate and they started to exert too much force. And also presidential form, president can check on side and power of judicial review on the other side. So that's why legislative have lost its power. I mean, decreased power. In communist countries, they are just as an agency of propaganda, and their position is surpassed by executive. President in US votes on the bill passed by legislature as per his will. Yeah, even the legislature passes the bill, it's under the purview of the president to either give his assent or not. And party politics, another important concept. So attenuation of legal legislative authority has said to have decreased because of increase in party politics. Because the popular leaders or the strong leaders will keep their party members in check. And what happens if the party members are put in check? They have to function on the lines of their party only, right? They cannot say their free will or their opinions. Supposedly, they say or they vote against the party opinions, they could be called for disqualification under anti-defection law, or if there's a whip in the house, they must vote for it, otherwise they could be disqualified from the house. So the power of courts, also judicial review, to look into the constitution validity of the legislature has affected its authority. So although these are negatives or these are positives, so there has to be a balance shall be maintained between the both positives and the negatives. So if we say that courts looking into the constitution validity is a negative, then that's not how the democratic institutions will run. So there has to be there has to be a balance that shall be maintained in order for you to understand why there is a decreased role and why this decreased role could be by the external agents that have taken over the control of the legislative. So this is for legislative and the executive. So if you got any doubts or the possible questions that someone has asked me, possible questions is types of executive, they'll ask functions, role, then types of legislature, unicameralism, bicameralism, you have to write, features, positives, negatives, examples, then functions of legislature, and then summarize it, then criticize because the role is increasing of executive role is increasing, legislative role is decreasing, criticize, analyze, then summarize as per, then you can use a liberty, draw the flow chart or make the pictorial representations or get any statement of any, just like this one, like legislature of the state is a custodian of the national purse. So like that, if you find across any statements, that could be great. So this is how you can approach the legislature and the executive. So this is one of the way you can have your own way. So if still you got any doubts, you can text in the box till it closes by. I hope I'm clear. Uh, Thank you. So if there are no doubts, mm, we can end this session or like we can wait for 5 more minutes. See you. I think see you in next class. We'll be having judiciary. Yes. judiciary and judicial review. And you can go through the YouTube live for the PPT slides and analyze or reread, revise. That's how should be the character of the student. Yes, so see you all.